Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Media Talks TV with your host Tony J. If you're new, hit the like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell for notifications. This is going to be an episode of retrospectives, another segment of retrospectives. Um, Today will be will be a special episode because September 8th marks the 30th anniversary of New York Undercover. If you've ever been a child of the 90s or you've grown up with Fox, there were a lot of pivotal shows that came out back in the early 90s. So when you think about television shows and when you think about Fox, there was this sense of Fox being a platform for out of the ordinary entertainment. We started in the 90s in the sense that the 90s kind of ushered in a floodgate of so many black shows. One in particular in Living Color. Um, most would say I would say go as far as back as Arsenio Hall really kicking off the popularity of black TV at its zenith. At its zenith. And when I say, this was black TV at its zenith, we talk about maybe 1989 to 1998. And then it kind of like fading off after the year 2000s because I was around for that time as well when it started fading off. And you had several shows on Fox. Fox was beginning to have a lineup of TV shows. So when Arsenio Hall took off, then you had shows like Rock, South Central, and Martin, Living Single. But those were like the block, which was like Wednesdays at well, actually Thursdays, excuse me, Thursdays at from 7 to 10, which was like a 3 hour, 3 to 4 hour programming block. And with that, Rock had become a part of that programming block, that Thursday night programming block, where you started to notice a lot of black folks started to watch shows, and Thursday nights was really reserved for Fox because of those sitcoms and those dramas. And then we come out with this show in 1994, September 8th, 1994, by the name of New York Undercover, which came right on after Living Single went off. So you started to see this stride. So in Living Color becomes the most popular show from 90 to 93, and then that fades off, they get canceled, and then Rock gets canceled in 94, becomes the mid-season replacement, and New York Undercover kind of slides into that slot where Rock was kind of in that slot for a while. And what was so interesting about that show, I remember very vividly growing up. I was like 5 years old, and me and my parents, we were living on Greenmount 33rd, And the one show that will always come on during that time period was New York Undercover. And I stayed up at night to watch New York Undercover. My parents let me watch New York Undercover. And it was one of those shows that you really can't forget. And even to this day, Black folks still talk about New York Undercover because it's I kind of reminded that it's kind of like the Black Miami Vice in the sense of how it was put together. And we could talk about that in a later episode, how, well, Miami Vice, because we have the 40th anniversary of Miami Vice coming up. And, Miami Vice comes out of the Dick Wolf franchise that created Law and Order and also Homicide: Life on the Street. And because, you know, Dick Wolf is such a imposing figure in cop dramas now, it it kind of laments the fact that there's a certain style that was created for cop procedurals that really Dick Wolf created when it came to Miami Vice and New York Undercover. And when New York Undercover came out, be reminded, during the 90s, there were so many cop dramas on TV. The one that really took the cake as far as a traditional procedural show was NYPD Blue. When NYPD Blue did so well in 93 and 94, it was the most watched show on ABC. But ABC, of course, was a family oriented channel. They were owned by Disney. Keep that in mind. Later down the line, there would be some big observations or big oppositions by the network to even air NYPD Blue, because NYPD Blue had soft nudity in it, as you might know if you ever grew up watching NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue had soft nudity, and the networks were kind of like, okay, well, they were one of the first cop dramas to have semi-nude people on TV. And there was a joke that went around, because ABC is owned by Disney, that you could actually televise the buttocks or the side part of the breast on TV, but you can't show the nipple and you can't show the genitals. And that was the thing with NYPD Blue that people don't understand. It was one of those first cop dramas. They set a standard in television at that time in the early 90s for that to appear. I don't think any other television show would have done what NYPD Blue done. But that's a side note for now. But I want to get back to New York Undercover, because the reason why New York Undercover stands out as one of the best procedural shows and cop dramas is because of how different it was from the normal cop shows. When you compare it to Homicide: Life on the Street, when you compare it to NYPD Blue, New York Undercover was the opposite of all of those shows. This was a multiracial cast, for one. This was the first time that we had both a black cop lead and a Puerto Rican cop lead, because both Malik Yoba and Michael DiLorenzo, they were both the first groundbreaking part of the show, where they were the first cop drama to have a black lead and a Latino lead. No other show had that. Now, the first show, of course, I'm going to go back to Miami Vice. Miami Vice was that show that had its first black cop lead with Rico Tubbs, and he became a house. Philip Michael Thomas became a household name, and also, what's interesting with this connection between Miami Vice and New York Undercover is that Michael DiLorenzo and many other cast members that were on New York Undercover actually started in Miami Vice. Like there was one particular episode that Michael DiLorenzo was on before he went to New York Undercover. And the interesting thing about New York Undercover is it comes from that Law and Order universe. So you saw um, many characters from Law and Order and Homicide: Life on the Street play on New York Undercover. And interesting enough, there weren't a lot of crossovers. There weren't a lot of crossovers besides maybe the Michelle Hurd character. And Michelle Hurd, of course, is in Law and Order, but she shows up a lot as the DA in New York Undercover. And after after that, because it's a part of the franchise, it's kind of like Dick Wolf kind of set it aside like an appendix of what that cop world was about. And what's so interesting about New York Undercover during that time period is it took place during kind of like a cultural, how would I say this? It was it was a cultural transitioning happening in New York City. Remember, like 1993 to 98 was, that was the era of Giuliani. So policing had drastically changed. It was broken windows policing in New York City at that time. And one of the things that the show emphasized was, busting perps, chasing down suspects. Uh, it was a rough and tumble kind of like Starsky and Hutch like kind of thing, but on a hip hop tip, because that's the vibe that I got from New York Undercover. It was kind of like Starsky and Hutch in a sense. And the whole buddy cop thing where they're chasing down suspects or running down through alleyways, I just thought like it was just amazing cop show. It was something that everybody wanted to watch. Malik Yoba was considered a really automatic overnight celebrity in the sense that he was one of those black men that kind of, got a lot of love out there. And especially Michael DiLorenzo, his popularity didn't happen until after the second season. So when Lauren Valise comes in the second season, you start to see the Eddie Torres, Lauren Valise characters kind of like becoming an overall Nina Morena being a part of the storyline. So you have all these kind of perspectives, but the thing that really drew the audience in was the Nina and the Eddie Torres plot line and that love story, which was a big pull for New York Undercover. And if they had kept it that way, they would have still had the success that they had, but because of the incident with Michael DiLorenzo boycotting New York Undercover because he felt like he was underpaid, that kind of killed it for a lot of people when they didn't want to talk about the show ever again. But the truth is that it was one of the greatest shows on television. And if you were there and you knew what it was like, you know it was no other show on TV that anybody wanted to watch except New York Undercover, you know? And it was one of those, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was one of the first shows to actually have guest star rappers on there. I mean, it was so many rappers on New York Undercover that I can't even count on one hand. Biggie was on there. Uh um Tretch from Naughty by Nature was on there. Sticky Fingers from Onyx was on there. And also, of course, Fredo Starr was had a brief character on that show. Like Sticky Fingers was really the first one to be on there, but it was really the natural overdraw of the show, the settings, the people that were on there. Like the first season had Gladys Knight and the whole jazz scene with Natalie's. I mean, there was nothing like, watching a show and you're sitting at home and you're seeing all these guest stars and the singers, like, at Natalie's. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. And to have that, like, imagine watching that on a big screen TV. That was really the highlight of the 90s, to watch that show on a big screen TV and listening to all these artists come on at Natalie's, like Gerald Levert and Luther Vandross and so many artists, and Aaliyah, rest in peace. Aaliyah had a guest star on the show. Boys to Men had a guest star on the show. Intro and Kenny Green. Kenny Green had a guest starring role on New York Undercover, and people don't even know that. They don't even know Kenny Green was on New York Undercover. And it was so many people that came through that show. It addressed issues of all kinds. It was the only cop show that really addressed issues that affected Black people. AIDS, the issue with crooked landlords, not fixing things and causing the death of innocent tenants and stuff like that. People burning down homes for insurance money that used to happen all the time in New York City. There was a character on there, and then there was the cut scenes of New York City that you will never ever see on television ever again. Cut scenes of the World Trade Center. If that alone doesn't make New York Undercover historically significant, that should really definitely make New York Undercover a historically significant show, because they had cut scenes of the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, when Malik Yoba and Michael DiLorenzo were up on the roof, and Patty D'Amberville, who played the lieutenant, and the part of that show which was so amazing. Like those first 3 seasons of that show were so good that the ambiance started to wear off. Um, of course, when they introduced McNamara, that kind of really destroyed it took breath out of the show, and it messed it up completely. And this is where this needs to be like a cautionary tale about television writing. When you have something good, don't mess with the formula. And Dick Wolf was kind of messing with the formula so much that it destroyed the significant uh syndication value of the show. I honestly believe that New York Undercover could have made it to 1999 or year 2000 if they had kept the same plot lines and made the story the way that it should have been made, and maybe added some characters along to transform the show, but to keep the integrity of the show intact. But that's not what they wanted. Fox didn't want that. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people stopped watching after season 3. You know, when I saw that car blow up, that was really kind of like the end of the ride. That was kind of like the end of the show. There's something symbolic about that car blowing up and Eddie Torres, Michael DiLorenzo being in that car, and it set off an emotional crescendo of feelings of how people felt about the show. And it's one primary reason why we as African Americans, we have to start owning our own platforms so that we could have ownership and control over our own shows and not have it be destroyed by people that don't look like us. You might think the actors have all the power and the directors have all the power, but it's really the executive producers that have all the power. And Dick Wolf had a lot of power, but I think if he had treated New York Undercover the same way he treated Law and Order, the same way he treated Homicide Life on the Street, or the same way he treated Miami Vice and everything else, it it probably would have had a lasting value. You know, it probably would have lasted longer. And I know a lot of people will sit up here and say, out of all the cop dramas, The Wire has to be the best one. But I don't think The Wire could hold a candle to New York Undercover. And I'm going to tell you why. And I know people aren't going to like this because it's not a popular opinion, but The Wire is from the angle of a newspaper reporter. So it's not about just simply policing, whether you believe it or not. It's about the city as a whole. So it's really like The Wire is not much about policing, but about the city of Baltimore, whereas though New York Undercover is strictly a police procedural. And with New York Undercover, the angles are different. They're looking at policing from a black perspective. And I don't think any other show could do this. I don't think Blue Bloods could do what New York Undercover did. I didn't like Blue Bloods too much compared to the cop dramas of the 90s. I didn't like Blue Bloods too much because it was too grandiose, and it was also uh it was too clean. It was too clean, and I didn't like that about that show, and it didn't have a diverse perspective. Still doesn't. Not even when it comes to black police officers. I didn't see that many black police officers in Blue Bloods the way that I saw in New York Undercover. When you look at New York Undercover, you got Puerto Rican police officers, you got black police officers, and it talks about the racial issue with policing. And that was a very important that's why New York Undercover was so very important for its time. You know, if there were a show like that to come up again, and if I were to really write a show with the similar arc that New York Undercover had, I would have definitely went the route of being diverse and not having shows focus on white cops chasing down black suspects or chasing down Latino suspects. And it's always been that setup in television going all the way back to Dragnet. And Dragnet has been around for a very long time. It was like for 40 fucking years. But You have all these cop dramas, and the angle with a lot of these new cop dramas that I don't like seeing is it's always white police officers chasing down minority suspects or suspects that are of color. And this is so important because a lot of people watch procedural dramas a lot. And the problem with procedural dramas is it's the same formula and the same setup of, just like, the Andy Sipowicz type characters chasing down black perps. And I've never really agreed with that. I did a previous video on that a couple of years ago about what was wrong with procedural dramas in the television industry and what needs to be done to bring that to a close, to change those perspectives. And the thing about the television industry in Hollywood is you will never get another New York Undercover. You will never get anything like it. I feel like there should have been more shows done similar to New York Undercover because it covered a wide range of topics. Whereas though in procedural cop dramas, they don't cover certain issues. It's always, somebody kills somebody who done it, and in a 60 minutes or 45-minute TV show. Uh, Last year we had East New York, and we had a black police commander, and I watched that show, and of course, I think it was a little too late, even with the diversity that it had. East New York was trying to go in that direction, but people got tired of seeing those type of cop dramas. I guess policing, in a sense, for a lot of people, was kind of on television has kind of died out. And I don't blame anybody for not wanting to watch cop dramas anymore after what happened to George Floyd, you know. But to get back to the main point, New York Undercover symbolizes a lot for black culture, and we don't put it on the same pedestal as, say, maybe a Cosby Show or Family Matters, but this was television in its prime, and it was the first time that hip hop got a platform on television, especially on Fox, because people were people were looking the other way and had a different perspective about inner city blacks. And then when New York Undercover came on, maybe some people, when they watched that show, maybe they changed their perspective about rap music and about how rap music was done. And one of the biggest pieces of why New York Undercover was so special too, which I cannot underline enough, is the issue of the arc of father of the black son and the black father relationship, which we will never ever see on television again. It was the only show that showed black fathers taking care and raising a black son. And I don't think there's ever going to be a television show where we see a black man like Malik Yoba taking care of G, teaching him right from wrong, teaching him not to call a woman out her name and stuff like that. Those things and the Million Man March and stuff like that. Like we grew up in the 90s. We saw so many things on TV, but the one thing about New York Undercover is the black father imagery that was so fundamentally important in our community, to see a black man raise a black boy on television in the 90s was unheard of. It was out of the ordinary. It was out of the ordinary. And how he maintained his relationship with um I forgot her name. Man. Um, maintain a relationship with Sandy, and then having a main relationship with Sandy, and having the mother of his child, being able to take care of the mother of his child, and respect that they even though their relationship was over, that they made good co-parents. Like, you didn't see them dogging each other out on TV. You didn't see any of that imagery where Malik Yoba was disrespecting the mother of his child. You didn't see none of that on TV. And you saw the black woman taking charge, and treating the man, also the black man, with respect. There was a scene in New York Undercover that I'll never forget. I remember you know um JC sending G over to his ex-girlfriend's sister's house, and the aunt was dogging the boy out, saying all types of crap, talking about he was just like his father. And then his mother stepped in and said, "You're not going to talk to my child like that. Now, whatever you had with your previous relationship that went bad, I'm sorry about that, but you're not going to take that out on my child." And that right there, that was made me respect her even more as her character. She was studying to be she was a nurse, and she was making sure that G grew up with his father in his life. She didn't deny him. She didn't deny his father. And even when G was having behavioral problems, and they got into it, she made sure to make it work. And that's something that you don't see on television no more. You don't see that. That's why I get on Tyler Perry so hard, because I remember a time when black television didn't used to show that imagery, didn't used to show black men and black women at each other's throats. They didn't dare try to show it on In Living Single. They didn't dare show it on Rock. They didn't show that type of imagery because it wasn't allowed, because in some cases the NAACP had consultants on those shows. And it's the imagery that is so important, because what we feed our children and what our children see, they go out into the world and they repeat that. And that's what was so great about the 90s, was that you saw TV shows where black men and black women had mutual respect for each other. They didn't dog each other out on TV shows. Whereas though you'll see Tyler Perry's TV shows, and you'll see black men and black women dogging each other out. And that's why I say all the time that Tyler Perry has done a great disservice to the black imagery, because he paints all these dysfunctional relationships. Whereas though when I was coming up and I watched New York Undercover, I didn't see that on there. And even when we saw it, there was always a consequence for what those men did. There were episodes on New York Undercover about domestic violence, about how men should be treating women, how men treat women, and how, these things happen, And it was so interesting. It was so many stars that came on this show. Mekhi Phifer. Mekhi Phifer got his start on New York Undercover. I mean, it's just so many people that we saw that made that show interesting. And I'm glad to know now that New York Undercover is on streaming devices everywhere, because for a very long time, People never got access to that show, but it still remains one of the most important shows. When you talk about black shows, black TV shows, you got the Jeffersons, you got Different Strokes, Cosby Show, Family Matters, and New York Undercover. Those are the most talked about black television shows of all time. You know, oh yeah, and Good Times. I can't forget Good Times, but you know, I don't think there's ever going to be another TV show like New York Undercover. I remember how popular it was back then. People started wearing Timberland boots. Timberland boots became popular because of New York Undercover. Rappers started wearing Timberland boots in '94 because of New York Undercover. Niggas started wearing first down jackets. If you don't remember wearing a first down jacket, then you weren't born in the '90s. I'm sorry. But back then, everybody was wearing first down jackets, hill figure jackets, NYC, DKNY shirts. So much cultural significant Jesus pieces. Putting on crosses. People had rings in their ear. People had, studded earrings in their ears. Dudes started wearing earrings in their ear and shit because of that show. People started sporting a bald head like Malik Yoba because of that show. Rappers started talking about New York Undercover, rapping about New York Undercover, like Pudgy the Fat Bastard, which was a rapper, said a line in Money Don't Make the World Go Round. He talked about Malik Yoba. It was a cultural phenomenon that lasted for 3 years from '94 to '97. And then with it, we saw the death of Biggie and Tupac kind of really take the wind out of the popularity of that show, and they started taking aesthetics away that made that show popular because of the East Coast West Coast rap war and how that came about and how it continues to had an overcast on the show. But 30 years and we're still talking about New York Undercover, and I hope we continue to talk about New York Undercover for years to come, because that show was really a symbol of the '90s that we should never forget. And if you got Peacock or streaming devices, go ahead and watch the show, reminisce about it, talk about it, you know, introduce it to your young children, younger kids. They need to know about the show. Continue to talk about New York Undercover. Pass it on to the next generation, because when these guys are gone, they're going to be like Malik Yoba and Michael D. Lorenzo and Lauren Valise. They all put their heart and soul into those characters. They left behind a legacy that people are going to continue to talk about for years to come. So, to show them respect, go and watch the series over again. I got a couple of favorite shows. I got a couple of favorite episodes. Man Child is really the number one episode in my book. I love Man Child. That was my favorite episode. Man Child was my favorite episode of all time. You know, this has been another episode of Media Talks TV with your host, Tony J. This is another segment called Retrospectives, where we talk about the past moving forward. If you're new here, click the like, subscribe, share this video. Got new videos coming up. A couple more videos before the sabbatical. This is Tony J.